And Michael, hello. My brain is fried today. I don't know why. Actually, I do, but you don't need to know why. I will say I was in Dallas last night. Okay, y'all, we will get started in about 1 minute. Are y'all still glad that we're meeting in person? I am. I feel really sorry for you guys. Just trying to be a blessing, you know? So.
You are a blessing. This is like my favorite class.
Oh, yay. In my last class, thank you, Rachel. In my last class, which is a medieval philosophy class, which is so fun for me.
Yeah, so the prereq for that class was this class. So
it might be. But I said, I quoted an advertisement that I saw many years ago in some runner's magazine. I like to run a lot. I'm sort of an addicted runner. And the ad was, I think it was for Nike running shoes, and it said, the only thing worse than running is not running, which is so true, so true. I totally think that that's true. And that also describes my relationship with philosophy. I mean, the only thing worse than philosophizing is not philosophizing. You might put it like this: the only thing worse than thinking is not thinking. I mean, thinking is inconvenient. It's inconvenient. It's inconvenient to open cans of worms. What's real? Is there a God? You know, is love actually real, or is it just neurons firing and pheromones and dopamine? Those are difficult questions. You might argue that it's easier not to ask them. But actually, I think that as hard as it is to ask them, it's even harder not to. That's my view. Okay, y'all, we're going to get started. May the force be with you. Welcome. Welcome. This is our third to the last class, maybe second to the last class. We have class on Monday and then Wednesday. And on Wednesday, I will give you your final exam. I'll talk about the questions. There will be 15 multiple choice questions. I'll talk about them, and that'll be that. Okay. Yeah, I really hope that on Monday I'll have a date for my gathering at my house. I still plan on doing that, and more details very soon to come. Okay, y'all. We are going to continue with Nietzsche. We're going to continue with the Dionysiac Worldview. Last class, we talked about Schopenhauer, this guy named Arthur Schopenhauer, who influenced Nietzsche a lot. And Schopenhauer was kind of a dark, scary thinker, right? I mean, I would use the word nihilistic. That word nihil is the German word for what? That'll be on your final exam. Schopenhauer was a very nihilistic thinker. In the spirit, in the vein, in the tradition of Heraclitus. You could say that he's a Heraclitan thinker. Now, can someone tell me why that is, or how that is the case, or what would make me say that? Why would we say that Nietzsche is a Heraclitan thinker? Why would we say that? Can someone help me out with that, either online or here in the classroom? He doesn't believe in form. I think that that's actually the best way to put it. And if you don't believe in form, and what is form? I mean, I think that a good way to start to think about it is shape. form is closely related to shape. And but form is also connected to the definitions of things, AKA their essences. So like we could look up frog in a philosophically airtight dictionary, or we could look up the following in a philosophically airtight dictionary. Let's see here. We could look up, hang on. Oh yeah. We could look up the Galanthus nivalis, in a philosophically airtight dictionary. It's a type of flower. And we could read about that in the philosophically airtight dictionary, and what we would be looking at or considering would be the essence of the Galanthus nivalis flower. That's form. That's form. This is what Nietzsche does not believe in. He thinks that the philosophically airtight dictionary is a bunch of BS. That's what he thinks. And it's not even BS. It's a power play. It's a power play. Knowledge, including science, for Nietzsche, is a way for the strong to manipulate the weak. Okay? And that idea is something that's blowing across our culture right now and has been for a long time. You might call it the hermeneutics of suspicion. This is why people in our culture, many people would say, you shouldn't read the great texts of the classical Western canon because they're all written by white European dead guys. And they're guilty of colonialism. Whether you agree with that view or don't agree with that view, I hope that you see how it's connected to Nietzsche. Nietzsche is the great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of that kind of thinking. You might call it a hermeneutics of suspicion. I'm suspicious of white people because they're oppressors. Or you might call it politically correct thinking, PC ideology. But Nietzsche is definitely the godfather of all that, okay? So he doesn't believe in form. He doesn't believe in essence. And if you don't believe in form or essence, then the only thing you're left with is what? Matter. I like it. Yay, you're thinking about Aristotle's metaphysical spectrum, I hope. Yeah. If you could somehow like suck out all the form from Aristotle's metaphysical spectrum, it's as if the only thing that would be left is matter. You could say matter. I like that. You could also maybe say change or flux. There's a lot of ways to say it, right? You could say that the world is a blooming, buzzing confusion. The way that Genesis 1:2 says it is that the earth was what?
Formless
and void. That's exactly right. So, see, Schopenhauer believes in all of that. He is a very nihilistic, Heraclitan thinker. He thinks that the world is kind of like that vinaigrette salad dressing, where if you shake it up, everything just swirls around. That's the nature of the real. Male and female is not real. Chairs are not real. What's real is this chaos. I think I call it a vortex of violent forces. It's like an abyss or a vortex. There's a word I can't remember right now, but it's this violent swirl of forces. That's what Schopenhauer thinks is real. And he calls it the primordial one. Now, I think that either in the video or in real life, I talked about how, if you think back to Heraclitus, see, we know that Parmenides says that being is one, right? But what about Heraclitus? Does he say that being is one or multiple? It's easy to think that, but he actually says I would argue that he thinks it's one, because that salad dressing, that swirling vortex, the vinaigrette salad dressing after you shake it up, you might argue that there's lots of little bits and pieces in there, but you can't even point to them because by the time you point to it, it's gone. Think about the flickering television static, the flickering, you know what I'm talking about, the 1970s television static?
Spicy.
Is that, would you say that's many things or one thing? Well, I think I want to say that it's one thing. It's a big mess. And it really doesn't even have parts. Like this chair has parts. Look, here's the table part, here's the armrest part, here's the cushion part. It has parts. But the flickering thing doesn't have parts. It's just a big mess. You can't point to anything because by the time you point to it, it's gone. Like the sandcastles in the time-lapse video on the beach, right? So I think it's best to say that even that's one thing that Heraclitus agrees with Parmenides on, is that whatever's real is one. And so what Schopenhauer, being a Heraclitean thinker, calls reality, his name for it. Like as a Christian thinker, I might say, if you were to hold a gun to my head and say, what's ultimately real? I would, or St. Augustine or C.S. Lewis would say, God and creation. That's what's ultimately real. Well, not Schopenhauer. He would say what's ultimately real is the primordial one. And it's like Heraclitus's salad dressing, vinaigrette salad dressing. And in German, it's das Ureine. This means like primordial. Maybe you've heard that prefix ur, like you see that in English sometimes, like, I'm not going to go into it. He calls it das Ureine or die Wille. This word here means will. And in the documentary, we saw that Nietzsche believes, or he talks about something called the will to power. He gets it from Schopenhauer. Okay? Now, this is the Dionysian. This is closely related to what Nietzsche means by the Dionysian. What is this? This stuff. Schopenhauer's view of reality. That is closely related to the Dionysian. Okay? Are you with me so far? Now, question. Is this a pretty picture? Is this picture pleasant? No, it's not. Would you agree? Nihilism is not a pretty picture. Nihilism is not painful. Nihilism is like a nightmare. Nothing's real. My mommy's not real. Nothing's real. It's kind of nightmarish. Are you with me so far? It's not a pretty picture. It's painful. If the question is this picture pleasant or painful? The answer is painful and scary. So what's the solution? Well, for Nietzsche, the solution is art. This is why the documentary talks so much about Wagner. Remember Wagner? If you've ever taken piano lessons, you know who Wagner is. It's spelled like Wagner, but in German it's pronounced Wagner. This is why the documentary talked about Wagner so much, because Wagner was an artist and he put on plays. And even though music was a key, like music is especially interesting to Nietzsche. Music would be his an important form of art, but the art of Wagner was both musical and visual. You could say that it was both aural, A-U-R-A-L, that means what you hear, A-U-R-A-L. You could say that it was both aural and visual. Wagner's art was. Are you with me? See, Nietzsche thinks that the solution to this, to the nightmare of nihilism, okay, he thinks that the solution is the metaphysical therapy of art. And y'all, that is the Apollonian, not the Dionysian. The Dionysian is sort of like unveiled, unfiltered reality. That's the Dionysian. It's what's most real. However, it's too painful. And therefore, to cope, to cope. Like you've heard of a coping mechanism. The great coping mechanism that Nietzsche advocates is art, or the metaphysical therapy of art. And that is the Apollonian. This is this kind of stuff will be on your final. I will have at least one question about the Dionysian and the Apollonian. By the way, you could say Dionysian or you could say Dionysiac. Like the title of the essay is the Dionysiac Worldview. Either one, doesn't matter. But see, if you look up the god, the Greek god, the deity Dionysius. Let me hear you say Dionysus. If you were to look him up on Wikipedia, you're going to see, and you might, maybe you already know this, maybe you remember it from the video that we watched before, but he's the god of what? Anyone know? Yes. Ma'am? Debauchery. What is debauchery? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Orgies, nakedness, X-rated stuff, but also getting drunk and getting high. Like that is the stuff that's what Dionysus was the god of. In Greek, the Greek, you know how many of the gods have a Greek name and a Roman name? The Greek name was Bacchus. And so that's what Dionysus is the god of. And I hope that you can sort of see how, like, imagine a drunken orgy. That's kind of like a chaos or a big mess. You know, I mean, I hope that you can make some connections there. He calls this the Dionysian, but the Dionysian, which is most real, it's what's really real. It's unfiltered reality. It's too painful. It's traumatic. It will destroy you. You can't bear to look at it. And therefore, we need a solution. We need therapy. And he advocates the metaphysical therapy of art. And that's the Apollonian. Because if you look up the Greek god Apollo on Wikipedia, you're going to read about things like light and images and pictures and icons and art. Okay? So, yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Dionysian and the Apollonian. I think what I'll do now is play the video again, and then we'll watch it for 10 minutes. If you're watching the YouTube video, then you will want to begin the video at the 40-minute mark. I'll put the link in the show notes of my YouTube video. Michael, I did put that on Canvas, by the way. But in the video, in the show notes below, you'll need to start at the 40-minute mark, and we'll go through the 50-minute mark. Then I'll pause it and talk about it. Yeah. How y'all doing? Y'all doing okay? Any thoughts, questions, comments, jokes, riddles, anything?
I do have a quick question.
Ghost stories? Yes. Who's talking?
It's Rachel.
Yes, Rachel.
Okay, and this is something I just kind of thought of, like, while you were talking, and how, like, he has this view of nihilism.
Yeah.
Okay, he believes nothing's real. He believes emotions aren't real. He believes feelings aren't real. How is it that he even believed there was a solution to the pain that he felt that didn't even existed? The
Great
pain
question.
he felt wasn't even real. Yeah,
great question. And, you know, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know how he would answer it, but it's a great question, and it's a potential critique against Nietzsche's view. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't agree with Nietzsche. Why not? Well, that's one reason why. Because if nothing's real, don't talk to me about art. If nothing's real, don't talk to me about will. Now, he might have some kind of comeback to that, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's compelling. So, great question, Rachel, and I agree with what you're suggesting. I'm not a nihilist. I believe that stuff's real. Why? Why do I believe that stuff's real? Well, that's a long story. It does have to do with God in my case, but it's not just God says there's real stuff, therefore I believe it. No. It's sophisticated. I love Nietzsche, but at the end of the day, I don't agree with him on everything. But anyway, Rachel, have I addressed your question a little bit?
Kind of ish, yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's a good point. If nothing's real, then how can you talk to me? Why are you even writing? Right?
Yeah,
Like,
nothing's real. I mean,
yeah.
the
Like,
idea, the pain that he's feeling. How, like, he's being soothed. I mean, how is he
yeah.
being soothed if it's not real? How is
Yeah,
the
right.
art that he believes therapy? How is that real? How does that even exist?
Keep doing it then.
Yeah.
Is
I mean,
it
I
all
think that there are
make
some
believe?
things that he could say. I mean,
Or do you just getting it?
Yeah, it looks good.
anyway, y'all, I think we'll keep going. Let me say this though, real quick before we keep going. You've probably heard the word deconstruction. I mean, 30 years ago, deconstruction, very few people knew what it was. Now it's sort of a common word. Deconstructive philosophers who, I mean, and I'm stereotyping horribly and grossly, but you could put it like this. If there's no such thing as truth, why bother writing a book?
See, oh my gosh.
Why bother having a conversation with someone? Why bother? And there was an ancient school of philosophers called the, what are they called? I think the skeptics. I think they're called the ancient skeptics. And they were pretty consistent. I mean, they ran around naked. Like they didn't believe anything was real, and they sort of acted like it. Now, maybe not consistently, maybe it's impossible to actually act like nothing.
Does your feel cold? It just like feel cold to me.
Could I get you guys to mute yourselves?
Until you touch it and your hands noticeably warmer.
Anyway, so yeah, I think that the ancient skeptics were more consistent than others, but it might be impossible to actually live that. I mean, suicide maybe, which maybe that's why the 20th century philosopher Albert Camus said that the last great question of philosophy is suicide. Very depressing, isn't it? I mean, just because it's depressing doesn't mean that it's not true. Doesn't simply mean that it's not true. At the end of the day, I don't think it's true. And it's interesting that it took our culture about, so raise your hand if you've seen that Netflix show. I think it was on like maybe 4 years ago called 13 Ways to Die. Is that what it's called? 13 Reasons Why? And also Bird Box. Oh my God. Wow. So, I mean, ideas have consequences, and Camus wrote that, Albert Camus, that the only remaining question for philosophy is why not suicide. I totally disagree with him, but it's interesting that it took about 70 years for the culture to catch up with that. But culture eventually does catch up to what these philosophers say, which is why you are living in a politically correct world, because Nietzsche said this stuff 120 years ago. He's the one that said knowledge is a power play. And so now most people believe that. That's the Kool-Aid of our culture. If you're not thinking, you're going to end up believing that, because that's the direction the wind is blowing. If you want to resist that, it requires, number one, becoming aware of it. Oh yeah, our culture thinks that like all knowledge is a power play, and then interrogating that, asking questions about that. But step number one is to become aware of it. The point right now is that ideas do have consequences, like if a philosopher's truly great, and Nietzsche was, Camus was, the culture will eventually catch up. Their ideas will filter out and become mainstream. And that's why you have a show called 13 Reasons Why, and a movie called Bird Box, in which the point is, why not kill yourself? Because Camus said that in the 1940s or 50s. Yes, ma'am. Sarah, did you say reductionist? Yeah. Yeah, that's an awesome question. I think Nietzsche, I think that Descartes, so you remember how Descartes, do you remember the sense in which I claimed that Descartes was a reductionist? It's because he reduces the human person down, not just to soul, which has lots of parts, memory, heart, will, imagination. No, just mind. So Descartes reduces the human person. This is his anthropology. That'll be on the final exam. His philosophical anthropology is that the human being is reduced or reducible down to mind. And I think that Descartes wasn't even aware of the fact that he was being reductionist. I think Nietzsche is aware that that is a problem. And by the way, if you were to ask, well, why is it a problem? That's a long story. We don't have time to talk about that. I think it's a problem. Nietzsche's aware of that. I think Nietzsche is less of a reductionist than Descartes. So I think one could argue that. I think it's less clear in his case. I mean, if he is a reductionist, then if he were a reductionist, maybe you could argue that he reduces everything down to matter. The thing, though, is that he doesn't talk about matter very much. He talks about will and the will to power. And is that reductionism? I don't know. Let me throw this out there. Maybe, just maybe, it may be that this notion of the will to power and this notion of this chaotic vortex of forces, it may be that that is an idea that is shrouded in mystery. And if that's true, then it may be that it's not reductionist. I mean, I think that sort of you could say that one of the ways to resist reductionism is to embrace mystery. Now, are there dangers of embracing mystery? Yeah, it can be a cop-out. It can be laziness. But I mean, I do believe in mystery. I'm also a Christian. So I don't know. All that to say, I don't know. I think you might say that he's not a reductionist because he embraces mystery. I don't know. Good. Okay, y'all, we're going to hit play on the 40-minute mark. And then we'll hit pause at the 50-minute mark of the YouTube video. Good questions. You guys were just doing real philosophy. That's cool. Thank you. Sorry? Oh, nope, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay. How do I do that? My brain doesn't want to work right now. Boom. Okay. We're now at the 50-minute mark. Is that right? I think that's right. The 50-minute mark of the video. And yeah, I mean, I think that's, so this lecture I gave a year ago, I prepared for it a lot, which is one reason why I just wanted to play it for you. And I think it's pretty good. But I actually don't have a whole lot to say about it. So I might just hit play again. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions about it right now? The Apollonian is the world of art. And it shields, it's a coping mechanism that allows human beings to survive in the face of the traumatic core of existence. Kind of scary. By the way, like I remember I've been to Europe a few times. Raise your hand if you've ever been to Europe. Anyone ever been to Europe? Yeah, cool, okay. And it's amazing how when you go to like Germany, like I lived in this one city in Germany for like about 8 weeks. And art is a really big deal. Like it seems like in the United States, America, it seems like no one cares about art. All we care about is like money and selling stuff. But in Europe, art is a much bigger deal. Kind of interesting. Any thoughts? Yes, Daniel.
Would you say like the Apollonian view of art could also be applied to the modern day of how people use movies and TV shows as a form of escapism?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that Nietzsche would be critical of that. One of the interesting things about Nietzsche, one of the reasons I like him, weirdly, but one of the weird things about Nietzsche, see, modern thought tends to be very democratized. Like modern people, ancient, pre-modern people believe very much in hierarchies. Certain things are better than others. Certain kinds of music are better than others. Bach is better than Kanye West, according to, are you with me? According to like pre-modern thought. Your grandparents, maybe you can imagine your grandparents saying something like that. Modern people typically tend to say, no, everything's just equal. Equal, 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 yay, equality, equality, yay, equality. Equal rights, everything's equal. Nietzsche, weirdly, was sort of a hierarchicalist. He believed in, he didn't think everything was the same. He didn't think that everything was equal. And he didn't think that everybody was equal, which that kind of feeds into that Nazi ideology, doesn't it? That's not to say that Nietzsche simply was a Nazi, but there's reasons why his sister Elizabeth was able to style him as a Nazi, right? But see, Nietzsche, he would be critical of that and the fact that we do that. My 13-year-old is addicted to video games. Maybe video games are better than like stupid TikToks. Maybe, I don't know. Nietzsche would be critical of that. He would be critical of the way that we numb our minds with the mindless consumption of media. He would be critical of it, but I still think that it's similar. I still think that the answer to your question is yes, it's related. I mean, am I the only one in the room who sometimes watches YouTube to escape my problems? I don't think so. Yes, ma'am.
So whenever it comes to his sister, like kind of turning like what he said into like more sort of Nazi views, why does it all fall back on him and not on her too? Like
Because, I mean, it depends on what you mean by fall back on. I mean,
like he's viewed in that way, even though she might have kind of turned his writing a little bit.
he's not viewed in that way by smart people, in my opinion. You know, I mean, I think that for people who understand the history accurately, they don't view him that way, in my opinion. Now, someone else might disagree with me. I mean, you know, philosophy is always contentious. It's not black or white. It's not like, it's not like mathematics. Now, does that mean that it's just about your preference? No, it does not mean that it's just like, I feel that Nietzsche's right. I feel that some conservative guy. No. It's not about preference. There are reasons. There have to be reasons. If you're going to be a responsible thinker, you need to have reasons for why you think what you think. But that doesn't mean that it's
You hear what he said?
white. Ma'am? Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was unmuted.
It doesn't mean that things are simply black and white. And so, in my opinion, I don't think Nietzsche was a Nazi. I think that there were things in his thought that lend themselves to being compatible with Nazism. And if someone just simply thinks that Nietzsche is a Nazi, I would argue they don't really understand the history, but maybe other people disagree with me on that. Cool? Good. Yes, ma'am, Sarah. And forgive me, I forgot your name. I'm so bad. Sierra, thank you. Yes, ma'am. The general artwork. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that he would include that. Again, the reason there's a reason I mentioned Wagner. There's a reason why the documentary highlights Wagner. I mean, Nietzsche was obsessed with Wagner. They had a personal relationship. Wagner's Spielhaus, that means like his building where he put on his plays, because they were musicals, they were operas, I think, but they were like dramatic operas, like Phantom of the Opera, that sort of thing. His Spielhaus the building where he put on his plays was at Bayreuth. Nietzsche hung out with Wagner. Nietzsche attended those plays. I think he had a crush on Wagner's wife, like all sorts of stuff. So now the thing about that though, and this is what I need to say in response to your question. Why did Nietzsche love Wagner so much? Here's why. It's because it reminded him of Greek tragedy. Greek tragedy. So in Athens back in the day, like in ancient times, they would have these big festivals, and they would actually require, like if you were an Athenian citizen, which by the way means that you're male, if you were an Athenian citizen, you were required not to work and to attend these festivals. I mean, like anyone ever been to ACL Fest in Austin? Imagine you're required to go there. And the government's gonna pay you to go there. That's how it was in Athens. Whenever they would have these festivals they would have these festivals where people would attend tragedies, but it's like theater. It's like an outdoor amphitheater that's really big, where they would put on plays. And so this is what Nietzsche says, that is awesome. Like, this is why Nietzsche loves the Greeks. He thinks that it's through these tragedies. And yeah, through these tragedies, like for example, Oedipus Rex, if you've ever heard of that, by Sophocles, and other, maybe you've heard of Medea by Euripides. There's famous examples of these tragedies. But they were cultural events. They were funded by the state. They were a really big deal. And Nietzsche thinks that's awesome. And so when he says that the Greeks were the first ones ever to figure out how to cope with the horror of existence through art, that's what he's talking about. But he thinks that Wagner is doing that for Germany. So Wagner's doing this brilliant thing that the Greeks invented in the form of Greek tragedy. He's doing it in the 19th century for the Germans. That's what Nietzsche thinks. So yes, art museums, yes, but first and foremost, it's Wagner. Now, by the way, and this will be the last thing I say. He did get in a fight with Wagner. They sort of broke up. Their bromance broke up. And after that, maybe he doesn't, maybe his views are a little bit different. Yes, ma'am.
I was gonna say, like, between, like, thinking of him and, like, a Nazi ideology, because if he was so obsessed with art, the Nazis were actually really art too.
They were.
Hitler wanted to be, like, an artist.
And he was an artist. Maybe it was bad art, maybe, but he was an artist, yes. And there's Nazi styles of architecture. I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm agreeing with you. I'm giving you a high five.
I just, like, last semester I was in class and watched movies, and that was one that Hitler was, like, a huge art person.
Yeah, that's true. It does make sense. It makes sense. I mean, art is important. Filmmakers are probably the most powerful people in our society, I would argue. You know, the Marvel Empire is probably the most powerful organization in the world in terms of shaping people's ideas. Yeah. Cool. Y'all, let's watch 10 more minutes and then we'll see what happens, okay? And Marvel is the literature of my generation and your generation. Sorry, film. I think, maybe Instagram is now. I don't know, but film is still pretty important, I think, for your generation. Okay, we're gonna watch 10 more minutes. So if you're on my YouTube video, what you wanna do is begin at roughly the 50-minute mark, maybe 49 minutes and 50 seconds, and proceed to the 1 hour mark. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, y'all, good class. Hope you're doing well. I hope you have a good weekend. Did I say May the 4th? Yes, I did. I did the ritual at the beginning of class. Did I forget? Okay, I think I did it. Yeah, we'll pick up with this next time. I want to talk about the word agon or agon in Greek. And I want to talk about poetry as being dreamlike and epic poetry. And we'll pick it up there on Monday. May the force be with you.
And also
Peace.
you.
Have a wonderful weekend.